I'm a busy bee, making the honey for my tea.
Hello everybody, my name is Dolores Keaveney and I write and illustrate picture books, and I'm going to read two of my books today. The first is going to be If I Were a Bee, I Dance on a Sunflower, and the next is Dee the Bee, and I'll explain all about the pollination and the flowers that the bee calls to collect pollen and nectar, and the fruit and veg that the bee calls to pollinate for us. My grandson and I will then visit a honey farm, my neighbour's honey farm, and they will show us how you get the honey out of the comb and into the jar. And my first book that I will read will be If I Were a Bee, so let's go. If I were a bee, I'd dance on the sunflowers, their big yellow faces as bright as the sun, hopping and buzzing and twirling for hours in those big yellow faces. I would have so much fun. If I were a bee, I would fly to a poppy field full of big bright red poppies for miles and for miles. I would drink all the nectar I could fit in my tummy from those big bright red poppies with those big bright red smiles. If I were a bee, I would fly to a meadow to collect up some nectar. Nectar is the juicy stuff that's inside the flower. And to collect up some nectar from each beautiful flower. I would turn it to honey in my hive. Just one taste would bring you alive. It would really bring you alive, and it's amazing to take, especially if you're sick and if you have a sore throat. It makes you feel much better. If I were a bee, I'd live in a beehive. My brothers and sisters would all live there too. We would work very hard making combs for our honey to bring big jars of goodness to each one of you. And when we go to the bee farm, I'll show you the honeycomb where the bee has stored all the honey. And we'll show you and talk to you about that. If I were a bee, I would work for hours in and out of the garden's flowers. The foxgloves, the daisies, the sweet pea too, collecting up nectar to make honey for you. And you see those flowers, they're called foxgloves, and we used to call them ladyfingers, and I really call them bee hotels. And the bee can go in there and just spend hours collecting up pollen and nectar too. The nectar for the honey and pollen for the food for the bees. If I were a bee, I would fly with my friends to a bed of red tulips so big and so bold, drinking nectar and pollen from each of the flower. Those big bright red poppies are a sight to behold. They surely are, and you can plant little bulbs in another month or two, and you'd have red poppies in your garden for the bees in springtime. If I were a bee, I would call on a fuchsia. These lovely flowers are called fuchsias, and they grow in hedges, especially down in Kerry and Galway, and they're really beautiful. I would call on a fuchsia. Its big bright flowers would welcome me in. I could go in there. I would feed on its nectar until I was bursting. Thank you, dear fuchsia. I will call again. And when we were young, we used to pull the centre out of the fuchsia and suck it, and you can taste the nectar. Really delicious. If I were a bee, I'd play in an apple tree With my brothers and sisters, we would have so much fun. We would spend all day pollinating the blossoms so you can have apples kissed by the sun. We need the bee to fly in and pollinate so that you can have apples. And I will tell you what pollination means in a few minutes. If I were a bee, I'd sleep in a poppy. Its big bright petals would cuddle me in. I would dream of new places to work and to play, and wake in the morning to a bright shiny new day, with new plans to collect more nectar and more pollen. If I were a bee, I would fly to the clouds. I'd twirl, I'd buzz, I'd feel very free. I'd fly to the meadows, the flowers and the trees. I could do all those things if I were a bee. So now I'm just going to show you some little things about my new book, Dee the Bee. It's a continuation of the other one. So I'm saying in the book that Dee the Bee, that the bee pollinates fruit and veg. That means it pollinates lot of the fruit and veg that we eat. And pollination means this. It means that when the bee, the honeybee, flies into the flower on the apple tree or on the fruit, it flies in there to collect up pollen. And the pollen that it collects sticks to its feet. So it flies in there, collects up the pollen, fills the pollen basket, flies over to another blossom on the tree. Then what happens is when it jumps onto that little petal in there into the center, some of the pollen that is on its foot falls into the center of the next flower, and suddenly it mingles with the seed of that flower, and the apple tree or the raspberry, strawberry seed grows and it gets bigger and you get a big, juicy fruit. And now we are going to read this book, Dee the Bee. And really it's about all the fruit and veg that the bee pollinates. And it's, if I were a bee, I'd pollinate the apples, the peaches, the plums and the berries. The apples, the peaches, the plums and the berries. They pollinate them. They pollinate the limes, the lemons, grapes, pears, rhubarbs and cherries. Limes, lemons, pears, rhubarbs and cherries. They also pollinate the turnips. Yes, the turnips. The pumpkins and the peppers. Pumpkins and peppers and turnips. They pollinate the chestnuts. You know those chestnuts that you use when you're doing conkers? They pollinate the chestnuts. The chestnut leeks, onions, radishes and cucumbers. They pollinate the Brussels sprouts, the sprouts that you eat at Christmas at your dinner. We need the bee to pollinate them. The cabbage and the celery. They pollinate the nuts, the spices and the beans, the carrots and the broccoli. We need the bee for the broccoli. When the honeybee is out collecting food like pollen, he never makes it's a she, a girl, it never makes a sound. It picks up pollen on its feet and spreads it all around. When the pollen drops inside the flower, it mingles with the seed. And this is how you get the fruit. It's magical indeed. So now you see it's down to me to pollinate all these. You won't have many fruits to eat if you haven't got the bees. Yes, it's me. My name is Dee, and I'm a little honey bee. And if you want to bring in some bees into your garden, you can plant lots of different flowers, but The bees love yellow flowers, so you'd want to be, you could get them, you could plant sunflowers, bluebells, delphiniums, red clover, dandelions. Dandelions, they love the dandelions, and they're the weeds that grow in your paths and around the garden, and people just kill them because they hate them, but the bees love them and they get a huge amount of fruit from them. So now it's up to you. You know, if you, the back page on this says, what are your favourite fruits and vegetables? You'll probably find them in this book, and if you do, they depend on the hard work of the bees. So we really have to look after the bees and care for them and make sure that they never die out. And here we are at Beekeeper Noel's fantastic bee farm, and he's going to show us how to get the honey out of the frame and into the jar.
This is the honeycomb, and the bees put honey into the honeycomb and they dry it on the dried. And when it's right, they seal it with wax to stop the honey from running out. So for us to get the honey out, we have to take the wax off. And we use a decapping fork for that. We just go in and we lift up the caps off it. And very gently, that we don't do too much damage to the comb itself. And you can see a little bit of honey coming. You can see it flowing out there. And we're just taking the caps off, so we're not doing too much damage to the frame. And then we just clean off the fork and stop.
Look at that juicy honey, ready to be put into a jar so that we can have it for our tea. Isn't that right, Hugh?
Yeah.
What do you think of this? It's great, isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't it great for a young boy to be able to see this?
This is ready to go into the extractor. And we're going to lift it up.
Look at this,
We don't
wow.
want it to drip
I
onto the
never
floor.
saw the inside of an extractor
Right.
before. Isn't that just
And we just
amazing?
have one more to put in to fill this.
Look at this.
Now we're putting the last frame into the extractor. And that's the extractor full. Right, we close down the lid. Now what's going to happen now is this extractor is going to spin around in a circle. And all of the honey is going to get thrown out along the outside edge of this here, and it's going to slide down until it fills up the bottom of the extractor. So we close it off and we hit
The
start button and it starts to spin around.
This is wonderful, isn't this amazing? Now, Noel is putting on a light.
If we look down along the edge there and get the right angle on it, you can see the honey being splashed against the edge. Do you see it there, Hugh? See the honey getting splashed out along the edge? I'm going to increase the speed a little bit and you see it getting thrown out. Now, see the honey getting thrown out along the outside edge, and see little pieces of wax there as well.
Yeah.
Right? Now, that's getting thrown out to the edge and sliding down along to the bottom of it. Now it's going very fast, isn't it? And that's the first part of the cycle done. Now it's going to go again, right? It's going to change around again. And this time it's going to spin much, much faster. This is a brilliant machine, isn't it? Going out. See the splashes? See them all along the edge?
Yes,
Are you
I
catching
can
it?
see them, yes.
Now I'm really turning up the speed.
Can you see it, Hugh? Yes.
So the honey is getting thrown out to the outside. It's coming out of the frame and the comb and running down along the edge, and it's settling in the bottom, and we're going to turn on the tap in a few minutes and we're going to take it out of the bottom.
Absolutely amazing. It's a great machine.
Now we're going to turn on the tap and we're going to take it. So the only thing we do with this here is we want to filter the wax that we're after spinning and the honey out. So we open up the gate like that and we'll see the lovely rich honey flowing out
Wow, isn't that amazing?
That
Hugh?
is the best
That
honey
is the
that
best
you could
honey
get.
that you could have. And it's local honey made by the bees. And it's the best honey is local honey, not the stuff you get in the shops. That is not really honey. This is the best. And if you have any asthma or hay fevers or anything like that, the best honey to eat is local honey. The honey that is made down the road from your house or up the road or in your town, around there, but not the honey from the shops. So Beekeeper Noel is an amazing beekeeper, and he has how many beehives have you, Noel?
I have 40 beehives.
40 beehives, and he has the most amazing honey. So myself and my grandson now are going to put the honey in the jar. Move over here. We get a jar.
Okay, we'll just open this.
Here. And we pour the delicious honey into the jar. And honey is about the best food you could eat. If you were sick and you wanted to clear a cold, you just take the honey. And I suppose you could nearly live on honey. And honey is produced by the honey bee. And if they go, well, we won't have any honey, and we may not survive. So look at that beautiful jar of honey. Hugh, what do you think? And we're going to put a label on this. Is that all right? To put our own label on it called Hugh's Delicious Honey.
That's all right.
Noel's Honey Farm.
That was a great experience. Now I made my own label to go on my own honey. And it's called the Beeless's Honey. Now it's all ready for me to eat for my tea. And just remember, you look after the bees and the bees will look after you.